Hello and welcome to ATG, the podcast, and I'm very pleased to be talking to Ciaran Talbot. Ciaran, you studied computing, and you initially, I think you worked at Manchester as an IT analyst. So what were you doing then?
Yeah, I mean, I've been working here at the University of Manchester. I got my first role here in 2004, so 21 years ago, I was actually a placement student. I was studying at another university, and I came here. Briefly worked in the real world. I worked for L'Oreal. I wasn't worth it, so I came back into academia, and I worked initially, as you say, as an IT support analyst in the central team. And then a job came up in the library, and I thought, oh, gosh, that looks quite interesting. And then 15 years on, I'm still in the library, and still interesting things are happening. Obviously, AI being the current one, and I've just been really fortunate to kind of move up to where I am now.
So this is very interesting. So a question immediately springs to mind. There's IT at the university and IT at the library. So how do they differ?
Well, central IT, I suppose, take care of more of those the processes and the structures that sit university wide. So a lot of the infrastructure. So we've got a lot of hosted applications. We're not doing that under the desk. We are sticking it on ITS's virtual servers, or they are sometimes kind of integrating with our platform. So particularly in the library world, there's been a lot of platformization over the past 20 years. So we subscribe to the catalog, the behind the scenes kind of systems, the reading list system. But then we still need to integrate with virtual learning environment, authentication. So we very much work with our colleagues in IT. But I think what we bring as an IT, well, a team who work with digital tools in a library, is we're just very close to the curators, the archivists, the teachers, the customer service team. I think we add a certain level of kind of contextual awareness, and actually, I like to think, passion for libraries as well, which, we're the best in the world. Not to disparage against my colleagues over the road in IT, I don't think you get that with a sort of totally kind of centralized approach.
Fascinating. So, but I have to ask you about the second part of your job title, Director of AI and Ideas Adoption, and it's that ideas adoption which sounds fascinating. How on earth do you manage ideas adoption?
Well, yeah. So we kind of under the tutelage of Chris Pressler, who's our director, came in with a vision back in sort of 2018-19. Imagine 2030. Don't have to quite imagine it. We're nearly there. But one of the kind of key tenets of that vision was to have an ideas-led workforce. So as opposed to everything kind of either coming sort of top down, we wanted people to be as creative as they could in their roles. And I think we've really run with that. But what I see my role as now, or at least the role of my team, is to support the ideas-led creative work of colleagues across the library. So it's a pivot that I'd say we're still making it. So moving maybe from a sort of more traditional service team to a more how do we enable your innovation sort of approach. The way that we're starting to think about that is we are kind of that bridge between some of the technology and your core role. So if you are a curator at the moment and you're developing your practice, however whatever that might kind of look like, we can work with you to maybe help you get the best out of the tools. And that's not just Gen AI tools. I think we've got access to an awful lot of technology, and we often only kind of sort of touch the edges of it. And I think there's a lot more we can kind of do to kind of support people getting the best out of that. So that's something that we are pivoting into, and I see that over the next sort of couple of years.
Isn't there a tension between the two terms, ideas and adoption? Ideas are sort of sexy, but adoption is sort of slow and difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Adoption is the challenging bit, and So I've just today actually I was in I've been in a workshop with academic colleagues from across the university, talking broadly about AI adoption, but there's and rightly so, we're a critical organisation. There's a lot of different views in the room, and rightly people are flagging up the environmental issues around Gen AI particularly, the ethical issues, the issues around sort of cognitive offloading, and what it might mean for sort of learning in the long term. And so to sort of adopt technology blindly is not the route that I think we want to go down. So although we haven't written this down, something I do think we are reasonably doing well is the thoughtful application. So no one is telling people you've got to use, for example, generative AI to create your reports. We are, I think, hopefully kind of letting people make informed decisions based on sort of the information before them. But I do think we've got a ways to go to sort of build that whole kind of ecosystem. Yeah.
Well, it sounds fascinating. My experience of organisations taking on software is it tends to be either top down or bottom up, and there's disadvantages in both of those. Which do you prefer?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's got to be both, hasn't it? I think what we're finding is there are colleagues, so sort of in the library context, who have discovered that they can use, whether it's Claude or Copilot or ChatGPT, to help them to some degree automate some of the processes that were formerly, I copy some data from here, I whack it in a spreadsheet, I do some transformation, I put it over here, and now you can actually sort of streamline that and actually kind of do, I suppose, what's the, maybe a kind of core valuable part of your role, which is, hey, look, we've got all this information, we want to get it out there to the researchers, to the students, to the academics as quickly as we can, with as much kind of human oversight as possible, and they're doing that quicker. But what we perhaps haven't done is kind of spread and communicated how they are using it in their sort of individual practice. So I do think what we need to do from that kind of top-down perspective is join up those pockets of champions, of people who are really experimenting, to kind of get that broader adoption. But I do think we've got a tension, because not everybody wants to sort of get involved, and I don't think we're not like a sort of commercial entity where, and I know from speaking to people who do work in the business world and for sort of large organisations, where it's this thing is here, you're using it, and there's no choice. Whereas I think one of the beauties of working at a learning institution is that you can have that discussion. So yeah, I do think we probably do need more direction to kind of get joining up the good practice. But it's really, it's fascinating to see how people are experimenting in their own roles. It's sort of like a new sort of toolbox of, gosh, this new thing that we can sort of play with. And what I need to do, working with sort of I suppose leadership at the university, is make the safe space, the sandbox, and then sort of the parameters around that.
One of the challenges is that must be that I know from personal experience, I used to be involved in companies that developed little AI utilities, machine learning utilities, and the problem is there's hundreds of them, and many researchers will sort of and students will start using one or two tools for themselves. The library might not even know know that they're using it. So is there some kind of channel by which these tools can be discovered? You can work out what it is that the students are doing.
We sort of, so there's, I suppose we think about it in sort of different sort of cores. So I suppose we think about the research that's taking place upon particularly library collections, because we've got a really we've got sort of 5,000 years worth of sort of rich collections. So we've got the research space, we've got the sort of teaching and learning space. So our library is really well plugged into the sort of kind of pedagogical communities of practice and institutes that are across the university. So we do think about the teaching and the learning, and then there's also kind of the ways of working. How do we, work with these new tools as a professional, as a library professional, as a sort of whatever your kind of role. In terms of connecting to the users in the research space, we're actually doing a bit of a project at the moment to get a better handle of where we think we need to be going with our sort of particularly our special collections platforms, which are, it's fair to say, quite a complex mix of systems that have grown over the past kind of 30 years, probably not very machine ready, and you need a lot of technical nous and probably money to be able to do your piece of research across, whether it's a Dante collection or Peterloo or whatever it is. So we're working more closely, I would say, than we have been with researchers to understand if, rather than build tools for a very specific use case, can we create an environment where you can draw in those collections and you've maybe got the kind of the off-the-shelf tools that you get with a Microsoft Azure or a Amazon Web Services to create that kind of ecosystem. To understand what the students are doing, we're really fortunate to have we employ students at the library, so we've got I think up to 20 students that we employ, and we can bring them into, for example, the workshops that we run, the digital skills sessions that we run. So we've got almost like a fairly direct dialogue. We also, at a university level, are starting to do a lot more around engagement with students. So, for example, we ran a town hall last week at the Students' Union just across the way, you get a very clear picture of what students are doing and how they're using it, but also the fact that they're not a monolith. In the same room, I had people who said, "Look, I don't want to use generative AI because I think it's awful for the environment, or because I think I don't think it's right that I'm put under a lot of pressure and I feel I have to just to be able to produce assessment." And equally, I had people who are going, "Oh, I hadn't really thought about the environmental impact. I think I'm just a drop in the ocean." So they're not a monolith, and I think the more that I can get people that I work with in my team and my and wider library just closer to that researcher voice or to that student voice and the academic voice, I think probably the better. It's an ongoing conversation. I think it's not a sort of one and done.
There was a very interesting. You have a fascinating blog for the AIIA team, and there was a very interesting blog about how you carried out a 2-day evaluation. This follows on what you've said for some reading list software. So, do you think that's a sort of a model for sort of going forward for sort of investigating how best to use how best to make effective use of software?
Yeah, potentially yes. No, I think that's it's a really interesting point. I think, and you can correct me here, but I do think that libraries are at a particularly interesting intersect in the generative AI explosion. We sit sort of in a space that's, for us, I feel we're at the heart of the institution. Yeah, I would say that, but I do believe it. But in the kind of AI space, our the books, the information, the data is the things, is the fuel that is powering this stuff. At the moment, we are open by default, so it's powering it whether we want it or not. And we sit in that kind of space. We also sit in the kind of the copyright and the IP space as well. We advise rest of the university around that. We sit across the teaching and learning and the research, and because of that, I feel we're kind of a core of this sort of this AI era that we're sort of in, and all of the platforms that we use, and that's whether that's e-textbook reading, the discovery tool, all of the publishers and aggregators who we sort of subscribe to their content. They've each now layered on a Gen AI, interface discovery bit, or it's weaving into the existing platforms. And I sort of picked this up with colleagues from other libraries in certainly the UK. I'm sure beyond. We're getting approached almost every day with from vendors and from people that we sort of purchase some of these systems for, saying, here's a tool. Would you like to try it? Would you like to pilot it? Or here it is. It's it's on. That's it. Or you want to work with us? Which all good things. Do approach us. We want to have the conversation early, but it is becoming a bit unmanageable. Colleagues are sort of coming to me for steer. So in the new year, we've not cracked this one, but in the new year, we're going to basically have a bit of a workshop. I'm going to pull some of these the colleagues who are kind of managing the services and are getting approached by the vendors who want to work with us. And maybe we'll come up with a little bit of a framework that you can go through to decide, is this something that we want that's sort of worth exploring, and B, if we are, what's that kind of decision tree look like in terms of turning it on, keeping it off, or if it's there by default, what are we going to feed back to the vendor? I should say as well, my colleagues have pulled together a bit of a document that we've shared across the library that will let you have a conversation with the vendor. So you might at least sort of be asking some of those questions about, is it hosted in the EU or America? What's your kind of environmental policy around generative AI and that kind of stuff? So it's definitely a journey that we're on.
I'm not surprised you get lots of approaches, because Manchester, as one of the largest universities and in the UK, is a sort of spectacular sort of if you like problem. In that I think last time I visited Manchester, they were telling me how many different collections you've got. It's something hundreds. It's in the hundreds of and this is just to do a search in the discovery system.
Yeah.
Isn't there the danger that with the bewildering speed at which discovery tools are sort of come out, and it's already the case that the library discovery system risks becoming a kind of almost an irrelevance, because people will go elsewhere and pick things up from Google Scholar or wherever, and not go to the discovery tool at all.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. It's something I have been reflecting on. How long is the discovery tool going to be what we perceive as library people as the front end to our library, versus it being a back end tool that library staff find quite useful? And I don't want to put a bet on that yet, whether the catalogue or my career will which will last kind of longer. But I think more broadly there is, again, and this is picked up through, at the moment, it's through speaking to colleagues at other libraries, we are seeing shifts in what were fairly kind of steady movements in the uses of our platforms, and what we've seen most recently is big increase in the amount of bots that are coming to your repository, coming to your sort of open house of where your sort of artifacts are. But we're seeing decreases in other platforms, particularly that students use, that are sort of institutional platforms. And I think, but what I really don't want to do, because I don't think we've done the research yet, and this is, I think, as a sector, is this is not to say that students aren't learning or researchers aren't researching. What I sort of hypothesize is that how they're doing it is changing, and I do think that libraries, this is something we need to get on fairly urgently. I think sort of, because as you alluded to there, that kind of disintermediation is something that we could see with particularly with the generative AI tools. I don't think. I mean, I still think the library has a space and a value in the search and discovery arena, and I do wonder if that will become as more and more people use these things, but also see their kind of shortcomings, I think the library has a space there to kind of step in and go, yes, look, it's part of your toolkit, but there's also a lot of other kind of approaches that you can take. Yeah.
I think one of the different approaches, inevitably, is I know from my own experience when I use Google, Google gives me an AI summary, and increasingly I just use the AI summary rather than any of the search results. Can you envisage a future when the library the library discovery tool sort of gives you the same kind of result?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can, in the sense that all of the big vendors, this is the direction of travel they are working towards. I think we will see this. I don't want to be sort of kind of a techno kind of determinist, but I feel it's something that's happening. As a library, as critical thinkers, I think we should be trying to shape that and work with vendors where we can, so we can sort of say, well, actually, maybe don't do this, or kind of do that. And I think, yeah, you're quite right. We are, as a in our digital lives, we are gradually being trained to trust the summaries. I do it myself. I've only discovered today that you can, if you want. If you're doing a Google search, if you add -AI, I think it will get rid of your overview if you really wanted. But obviously that's a barrier hurdle that not many people are going to engage with. And I think, yeah, what I think what we'll also start to see more of is the kind of longitudinal studies around the impact on people's cognitive abilities and development. If as a non-expert you are just using the generative AI in a subject area, it's that kind of, where's the learning taking place if nothing is sort of travelling through your grey matter. But in its sort of answer to your original question around the search and discovery, what we're doing at Manchester is we're just starting a project to kind of look at the changes in user behaviour, of which this will be one part. What does the use of generative AI, as opposed to maybe kind of more traditional library kind of entry points look like, and then what does that mean for us? Does that mean we need to be thinking about how we get into these spaces, or is it how we teach our students to think, information literacy and how they perform search and discovery, or is it probably a combination of a lot of things? I would suggest probably the latter.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned on the AIAA blog that what universities can and can't do, and one of the things that university can't really do is build an LLM from scratch, because you don't have the sort of just the computing firepower. So what can an institution do?
Yeah, you're right. We can't sort of do what your open AIs have done. What you can do, and I've seen some universities do this, is basically sort of build on top of an existing model. So I think it's University of Michigan, and over here we've got the University of Edinburgh, who built the Edinburgh language model, the ELM, which I think is sort of it's a layer of the institution's kind of built a layer, and then maybe uses models underneath, or kind of plugs and plays models. And the advantage there is you've got some level of control over perhaps the kind of safety of the interactions people have, and you can maybe draw in some institutional resources as well. So I think, yeah, you're right. We probably can't build one from scratch, but what I do think we should be doing, and I know other institutions are, what we should be doing is definitely experimenting. So if we have our sort of corpora of research output from the university, so all of the articles, all of the journals, maybe sort of book chapters, we could build, I think without too much hassle, something on top of that would use that as its sort of, it could use your retrieval augmented generation, the kind of RAG model. Not because I think that's the sort of end solution and that we maybe want all of these different chatbots, But I think we'd get a lot of learning from that would then help us make much more critical decisions about deciding, we'll go in for that tool from that vendor or that sort of big tech provider, as opposed to just letting it kind of wash over us, and we sort of feel we have to do, take whichever kind of platform it is. So I think my kind of view is one of experimentation to then let us take more informed decisions, because I appreciate we cannot always build these things ourselves.
Well, Manchester's in a perfect position in that, as one of the largest universities, I noticed that your own repository has got some 250,000 content items. So there's a great place to a great place to start. Again, from your blog, there was a fascinating post from a member of your team, a different use of AI, but this was using AI to create archive catalogue records using XML. So that was a sort of is your team actually looking at sort of different uses for AI tools in this way?
Yeah, so yes, my colleague Stephen there had been experimenting, and I suppose that's one of the great use cases I point to of someone who has spotted an opportunity and kind of ran with it, and then is disseminating. Actually, he ran a bit of I wouldn't say workshop, but an overview of what he did the other week, and I think that's that's kind of the one of the gaps for me that I think we're starting to fill is you've got the off-the-shelf consumer tools, whether it's Gemini or Claude or Copilot, and then you've got your practice as a whatever you do, whether you're frontline customer service in the sort of a digital team, or you are curator. That gap at the moment, it's the self-motivation of you thinking, I'll have a play to apply this sort of the off-the-shelf kind of tooling that you get, and I don't think what we've done is provided perhaps that kind of scaffolding, a framework, so that if I am if a kind of role I am in, I've got sort of some use cases that I can just kind of work with and run with. I think we're still working towards that. So yeah, but we are experimenting in and working with tools. And what I am really interested in is, again, it's about getting what we've got already out into the world. I'm aware that only a fraction of our particularly our special collections are catalogued at sort of itemized level, let alone digitized. And if we can use this process to kind of get even a good enough piece of metadata around an object that it's then discoverable, that then a researcher could say, I didn't know you had that, and then kind of start that kind of process. That's what I'm interested in, and colleagues are experimenting with that. So as well as creating metadata, I've got another colleague who is using, I think particularly Gemini, and Gemini 3 is really good at this, but transcriptions of correspondence, diaries, and that kind of stuff. So we're definitely trying to build I'd say sort of a toolkit, an ecosystem where we've got the different tools and approaches that we can use, and connect that up with researchers and with learners as well.
Sounds fascinating. Let's stand back a bit and talk a bit more about sort of open science or open access. I'm sure you noticed the proportion of the trend towards open access seems to have slowed down a little bit in recent years. Is this something we should be worried about?
Yeah, it is a challenge. It's from my kind of reading, and I'm not. We're really fortunate to have the Office for Open Research in the library, and they are very much. This is kind of their bread and butter. But yeah, my kind of reading is there's a real disparity globally between parts of the world where open access they're still going like full guns, and then other parts where things are just it feels there's a sort of sand in the gears. It's the kind of the light that AI is throwing on it is that it's sort of bumping up against the library's natural inclination, I would say, to be open and to push open science and open research. And what we have done effectively is gifted, again, a lot of information and data to some big companies who are then selling that back to us in the form of these generative AI tools. which I think is at the moment an unreconciled kind of relationship. So yeah, it's yeah, it's a tension that I certainly feel, because I feel like every time I bump up against a paywall, and then I'm lucky because I'm a member of staff and I can get through it because we've got all these subscriptions, and yet you think, people I know from outside of academia don't have access to this information, and yet they've been directly kind of paid for it. So it's a challenge, and then interestingly, if they use a consumer Gen AI tool, they may get parts of that research, because somewhere in the background it's been fed into the training model. I don't have a good answer to that one, but it's certainly a tension that I am seeing and picking up in the conversations I'm having.
One of the key, one of the fundamental issues that are becoming increasingly relevant with open science is that of trust, sort of authority and credibility. Can you believe that the article you're reading was actually written by that person, and is there genuine research behind it? So, are there any moves? Are there ways in which you can increase the sort of trust and that kind of reliability through the work of the library?
Ooh, yeah. Again, with the kind of AI angle, that trust, I've really seen it in some of our academic colleagues who are feeling like they have to be the police person when a student submits something, and they then feel that they've got to then, has this been generated? What does that conversation then look like? And perhaps don't feel they've got the tools and the kind of framework to kind of make that, and it's maybe disrupted that relationship, which should be a bit more kind of collegiate, maybe pastoral. So I think there's definitely sort of a tension there. I mean, again, kind of on the trust side, the risk, as we touched on before, is that we trust generative tools implicitly, when actually we should be thinking really critically about them, because again, it's only when you really start to play with them, and maybe you feed it your own teaching, or your own sort of something that you kind of really know about, and have it kind of return that to you, you go, gosh, it's not really understood it. It's averaged it out and sort of bounced it back at me. So I think the role that the library plays really should be as a centre for that kind of critical thinking that we should have around AI, generative AI, and that's, again, it's something that we're working towards, certainly in the kind of student space, and to be fair, I think probably in the research space as well. We as I said, we've got the Office for Open Research in the library, and they are also thinking about how AI is changing and shaping research and what it means for open research and open science. Particularly now, so much of research has a digital element. You might have built some software for your thing, and what does that mean for us then packaging up? Research is not just that article that hits the journal. It is actually all the data that you use to get to that endpoint, and the software, and now the Gen AI generative software that you might have also used as well. So there's a bit of there could be a kind of a future data crunch in just trying to deal with all this sort of the exponential data that comes along with open research, open science as a practice, as well as the issues of trust.
What you're describing seems very much along the lines of sort of AI literacy. That if you like, a kind of critical thinking. I think you said sort of an attitude towards AI, not necessarily building the tools, but actually learning how to use them. Is that a role the library should have?
Yes. No. It's a good point, and I think the risks that's been flagged to me around AI literacy is sort of that kind of teaching to tool, and again, this is feedback I've picked up from colleagues who are in the room with students doing the teaching is that they've gone down the route of prompt engineering, and the students have said, actually, look, this is sort of like my grandma trying to teach me how to use my mobile phone. We know this bit. What we want to know is, we want you to teach us as you say, the critical thinking skills, and the sort of the literacy, not just how to use ChatGPT. And again, absolutely, the library has a central role for that, and certainly that's something our the teaching, learning and students team at my library is looking at.
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion in open science about moving to new publication models. I'm sure you've seen the eLife and moving towards this idea of publish, review, curate, and having open peer review and so on. Is there a way the library can support these sort of initiatives?
Yes, no, absolutely there is. We're often the place where you deposit your preprint, and manage that relationship, if it is with a vendor, with the sort of the infrastructure and the platforms that kind of manage that process. So yes, the library absolutely should be central to that. And I think what we're doing at Manchester is starting to think about what that infrastructure needs to look like, also in a machine ready way. So we're sort of looking ahead to thinking which parts of this process will be automated, and how do we move beyond perhaps the PDF that lives on a server, and make your sort of research output and information kind of much richer, but also something that you could then later run kind of meta-analyses across the sort of institutional research output. And yes, I think that the library should be where that all happens. That's certainly what we're sort of working with obviously partners from across the wider institution. We're not trying to gatekeep.
It sounds fascinating. Well, Ciaran, it's been great to talk with you and to learn about your role, and I very much look forward to hearing from you, and I look forward to sort of seeing more posts on your blog about new initiatives from your team, which I think are excellent use cases. So thanks very much for your time, Ciaran.
Oh no, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you. And I will. I've listened to a few episodes, but I will listen to a few more. Maybe not this one, but certainly ones with other people.
Thanks again. Thank you.